The buzz of my phone pulled me from sleep. I reached over, expecting a message from my sister or maybe one of my developers in a different time zone. Instead, it was a single text. No greeting, no explanation. Just this. Laura, after careful consideration, we've decided to move in a new direction. Your role is no longer required. Thank you for your service. Please ensure all access is relinquished by end of business Monday. Management. I read it 3 times, each time slower than the last. I wasn't hallucinating. 23 years, thousands of hours, millions in revenue. And a company I helped build from a folding table in a shared co-working space, now severed with a text message on a Sunday morning. I should have been furious, or heartbroken, or at least shocked. But I wasn't, because somewhere deep down I'd seen this coming. Still, I took a breath and typed my response with the same calm professionalism that had carried me through acquisitions, layoffs, investor feuds, and late-night debugging sessions. Wishing you all the best moving forward. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. My name is Laura Klein. I'm 57 years old, the co-founder and, until this morning, the chief systems architect of Redline Tech Solutions, a mid-sized SaaS firm headquartered in Denver. I raised my daughter through 2 recessions and 1 pandemic while growing this company from a bootstrapped idea into a $40 million operation. I didn't have investors back then. I didn't even have proper health insurance. What I had was a whiteboard, 3 laptops, and an idea that wouldn't let me sleep. And now, I had a text message. Sent by Connor Maddox, the 32-year-old modern visionary who had joined us 6 years ago as a junior product manager and climbed the ladder fast. Too fast. Connor had charm, no doubt, and a Stanford MBA that made investors swoon. He'd been promoted to CEO just over a year ago after the board pushed my co-founder into early retirement. I stayed on, thinking I could adapt. But that was my first mistake. Thinking that loyalty had any place in a world that worships disruption and youth. Back when Redline was just an idea, I was coding in my garage while my daughter napped on a secondhand couch. I'd built systems before, for medical offices, real estate firms, even a few early .coms. But this time was different. This time, I wanted to create something bulletproof. Custom-built from the ground up. Secure, scalable, elegant. And so I did. I architected the core system of what would later become Redline's flagship product, SecureSync, a secure file sharing and collaboration platform used today by over 600 enterprise clients, including 3 financial institutions and 1 federal agency. The entire infrastructure was layered, hardened, and reinforced by my own encryption framework, buried deep in the core, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. I never imagined I'd need a failsafe. But I built one anyway. I walked into my home office and booted up my personal terminal. As the custom OS loaded, a quiet welcome chime sounded. The one I'd hard-coded years ago. My fingers danced across the keys, accessing the logs, reviewing the heartbeat of the system still running flawlessly, still breathing, and still entirely under my control. Connor didn't know that. He thought I'd handed everything off. Thought he'd replaced me with agile workflows and PowerPoint decks. What he didn't realize was that Redline's entire infrastructure was still running on my code. Code that required periodic manual verification, silent keys, and encryption maps that only I possessed. Code I had encrypted using my own protocol and distributed across 4 access points, 2 of which had been deactivated last month when he reorganized the systems team without my knowledge. I closed the terminal and sat back. The system wouldn't fail today, or tomorrow, but in 11 days, the auto-renewal process for the core license certificates would trigger. And when that happened, unless someone entered the proper passphrase, the system would enter fail-safe lockdown. Not to destroy it, but to protect it. From misuse, from sloppy hands, from people like Connor. It wasn't a trap, it was insurance. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Maya, one of the original engineers I had hired 15 years ago. It simply read, "Please tell me you saw the news. They've already locked your email. They really think they can run this without you? I smiled just slightly. They could try, but the real question wasn't if Redline would break. It was when, and whether I'd be willing to save it. Monday morning arrived colder than expected. Denver skies were gray, and so was my mood as I watched early risers jog past my house while I sat with a mug of coffee I didn't remember making. My inbox had been deactivated overnight. My work Slack channels were silent. After 2 decades, it was like I'd never existed. No farewell email, no transition meeting, no acknowledgement of what I had built. Just silence. And somewhere in a corner office downtown, Connor Maddox was probably high-fiving someone over how clean the exit had been. I logged into my personal systems again. Redline's servers still hummed, their logs streaming in my encrypted monitoring portal. No signs of panic. Yet. But I knew the countdown had begun. 11 days. That's when the renewal protocol for Redline's core authentication suite would attempt to engage the new security keys. And unless the system received the passphrase from an authorized admin, an admin they no longer had, it would initiate fallback. And fallback was not pleasant. Fallback meant clients would begin receiving failed certificate notifications. Not immediately, but gradually. A slow degradation of trust. Access issues. Login failures. Sync disruptions. I hadn't designed it to punish. I had designed it to protect. But without the passphrase, the system would interpret the silence as potential compromise. It would lock access to sensitive data, pause synchronization across distributed nodes, and require manual intervention, something only I knew how to perform. Not because I was trying to be indispensable, but because they never cared to learn. Redline had its first major data breach scare. A third-party analytics plugin had introduced a vulnerability, and overnight, client data was almost exposed. We caught it in time. But it was a wake-up call. Connor wasn't even at the company then. It was me, my co-founder Neil, and a handful of engineers doing 16-hour days trying to contain the damage. That week, I decided I'd build a system that didn't rely on memory or guesswork. A self-auditing framework with built-in fail-safes that assumed human error. Not if, but when. It took me 8 months. I rewrote entire modules. I documented every piece, on paper. I created a physical key map that only Neil and I had access to. He stored his copy in a fireproof box. Mine stayed in my safe. When Connor joined, he never asked about the legacy infrastructure. He brought in his consultants. They installed new dashboards. They redesigned the UI, but they never touched the roots. And you can't redesign a tree from the leaves. By noon Monday, the calls started. First, it was Jordan from payroll. Hey, Laura, I know this is weird, but do you remember how the internal payroll access gateway interfaces with the contractor database? I'm locked out, and IT said you manage that system. I paused. He sounded anxious, not panicked. Yet. I'm not with Redline anymore, Jordan, I said, calm but clear. I received notice yesterday. Oh, I didn't realize. He hesitated. It's just, we need access by end of day or no one gets paid. That's unfortunate. Another silence. Then a soft, almost embarrassed voice. Do you still have the override credential? I didn't answer, because he already knew. An hour later, Maya called. She didn't bother with small talk. They've shut down your remote access, but the system still flags your signature as a primary admin. You know that, right? I know, I replied. They didn't. I just watched Connor in a meeting try to act like nothing's wrong. But the junior devs are freaking out. Some update tests already failed. I could hear typing in the background. Probably from her home rig. She'd always worked better outside the office. It's why I let her do deployments remotely when she was still a junior. She never forgot that. Do you want me to fix it? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, no. I want you to do what you think is right, but they're not ready for what's coming. That night, I pulled out a thick black folder from the back of my closet. Inside were handwritten diagrams, key logs, timestamps. The same documentation I'd offered to digitize 3 times. Every request denied. To legacy, they'd said. We'll move everything to the cloud. They never asked where the encryption keys lived. They never asked who regenerated the salts every 6 months. They never even looked at the original server architecture, which still routed through 2 of my silent fallback nodes. I flipped to the last page of the folder. A short line of code. My final safeguard. A script that, when executed, wouldn't damage the system, but would bring it to a complete halt. A pause. A system-level reminder. This infrastructure was never meant to run without understanding. Please return to origin for reset. I closed the folder and locked it back into the safe. I wasn't going to break anything, but I wasn't going to protect them from themselves either. Not yet. On Wednesday morning, Maya texted again. Laura, it's starting. Multiple client systems failed the overnight sync. Connor's blaming the IT team. You might want to check your logs. I refreshed the system. Node 4 had just gone silent. 10 days left. Wednesday, 6:32 a.m. Maya's message was short, but it landed like a hammer. Laura, it's starting. Multiple client systems failed the overnight sync. Connor's blaming the IT team. You might want to check your logs. I set down my coffee and slid into my home office chair. Node 4. Silent. That node served authentication requests for 7 enterprise clients, including Vantage Bank, our oldest financial customer. The certificate validation ping had failed twice overnight, just as I had predicted. Without manual override, the system was in fallback mode, cutting off synchronization and escalating logs to the secondary failsafe queue. Not a full shutdown. Not yet. But the symptoms were showing, and they were only going to spread. I opened a secondary monitoring screen and watched as red flags blinked across nodes 3 and 7. Not critical, not total failure, but cracks. Clear and growing. They were already late in fixing it. By 10:17 a.m., I received a LinkedIn message from one of the newer engineers, Tomasz, a quiet but competent back-end dev who'd joined 2 years ago. Hi, Laura. I hope you're well. I know you're no longer with Redline, but I was wondering if you have any advice on the legacy cert validator used in SecureSync v3. Our internal documentation references something called gate check, but no one knows what it does. Gate check. They really didn't know. That was the handshake verifier I wrote in 2012 after a customer-side certificate failure caused a 3-hour sync blackout. It silently intercepted verification mismatches and pushed a delayed retry process through a sandbox until the system could safely resolve the key difference. Without it, the entire handshake loop stalls. Redline's architecture had evolved since then, but the backbone of that process, the logic, still ran on that silent script, buried deep. Stable, untouched for a decade. I didn't respond to Tomasz. I needed to keep emotional distance. I'd given everything to that company, and now that it was unraveling, part of me wanted to let it burn. But there were clients involved. People. Businesses depending on access to their systems to run payroll, coordinate shipments, secure private data. And I still cared. That was the hardest part. I still cared. Not about Connor, or the board, or whatever excuse they'd give to cover this up later, but about the people I'd built this system for in the first place. Thursday, I went out for a walk. I needed space to think, fresh air, to remember who I was before I became obsolete and outdated. Near the corner cafe, I ran into Kevin, our former director of implementation. He looked surprised, then guilty. Laura, wow. I didn't expect to see you around here. I still live here, Kevin, I said gently. He nodded, embarrassed. They're not handling it well, he admitted. The transition, I mean. Systems are acting up and, well, you probably know that already. I've seen the signs. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. Connor's pretending everything's under control, but we had 5 client escalations yesterday. The board is asking questions. That made me pause. The board? He nodded. There was a closed meeting this morning. Robert Bernstein from legal kept repeating that someone failed to ensure proper handoff documentation. Connor's blaming you. I had to laugh, softly, bitterly. Of course he is. That night I received another message, this time from a number I hadn't seen in years. Neil, my former co-founder. The one who left when Connor was named CEO. Saw what's happening. You okay? I'm fine. You still have access, don't you? They never revoked the root credentials, just front-end admin layers. That was a mistake. Yes, I replied. A big one. There was a pause before his final reply. What are you going to do? I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure yet. Friday, 3:04 p.m. 3 more client systems failed during automated rollouts. Certificate mismatches, sync issues, locked admin dashboards. Customer support was flooded with tickets. And all the engineers were scrambling with incomplete documentation, guessing their way through a system that was never meant to be run blind. And still, no one called me. Not Connor. Not the board. Not one official acknowledgement of what was happening. Just the slow unraveling of a machine that had run smoothly for over a decade, because someone knew where each cog fit, and that someone had been erased with a text message. On Saturday morning, I opened my email to find a subject line that made me sit up straight. Urgent System Stabilization Request from Board of Directors. Underneath, just one line. Ms. Klein, would you be available for a confidential consultation regarding Redline's core infrastructure? We are prepared to offer compensation. They were finally reaching out. The question now was, what would it cost for me to save them? Saturday, 9:12 a.m. The board's email sat unopened for a minute as I stared at the subject line, the words swimming in my still waking brain. Urgent System Stabilization Request. It wasn't from Connor. It was from the Board of Directors' official address. I clicked it. Ms. Klein, we are requesting your availability for a confidential consultation regarding Redline's core infrastructure. We believe your expertise is uniquely required to resolve certain urgent issues that have arisen during the current system transition. We are prepared to offer compensation and work within your terms. Please let us know how you would prefer to proceed. There it was. No apology. No mention of the termination. Just business. I closed my eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply. This wasn't just about code anymore. It was about legacy. About how easy it is to discard experience and how expensive it becomes when that experience turns out to be irreplaceable. Still, I wasn't vindictive. I didn't want Redline to collapse. There were too many good people still working there. People I had mentored, supported, hired, trained. But I also wasn't walking back in with my head bowed. Not this time. 1:44 p.m. I composed my reply. Every word chosen with care. I am open to consultation under the following conditions. 1. Remote access only. No in-person meetings. 2nd. Full autonomy to perform necessary diagnostics. 3rd. A written agreement acknowledging that any code authored or guidance given during this engagement remains my intellectual property, licensed to Redline for this instance only. 4. A daily consulting rate of $3,000 with a minimum 1-week commitment paid in advance. 5. I will not report to Connor Maddox, nor will I engage in meetings where he is present. I hit send. Then I waited. It took 42 minutes. The reply was short. Agreed. Access credentials will be issued by 3 p.m. today. Payment confirmation attached. And just like that, I was back inside the system I built, with the control I never should have had to give up. 3:05 p.m., remote access restored. Logs, protocols, fail-safes. Everything was still there. It felt like returning to an old house no one had cleaned. Dust in every corner. Critical patches missed. Old alerts buried under unopened notifications. They hadn't just failed to maintain it, they'd actively broken it. Connor's team had tried to insert modern tools, new frameworks, flashy integrations, without understanding what made the system stable in the first place. They'd overwritten dependencies, removed essential verification delays, and unbelievably disabled gate check. I had to undo most of their upgrades just to begin diagnosing the deeper failures. Sunday, 10:22 a.m. I had been working nonstop for 19 hours. I ate a granola bar at my desk and sipped cold coffee while reviewing the results of my first full system scan. The root certificate chain had already triggered 4 lockout thresholds. The fallback nodes were still running, barely, but unless they were manually resynchronized, the whole system would trip the final kill switch within 6 days. I patched the immediate issues, wrote a temporary script to stabilize the most critical nodes, enough to buy time. But I didn't implement the full fix yet, because I hadn't decided if I wanted to. Monday, 8:03 a.m. A new email came in, this time from the board chair, Deborah Lynn. Ms. Klein, the stabilization results are showing. We're extremely grateful. I'd like to speak with you directly, off the record if possible. I agreed. We scheduled a secure call for noon, 12:01 p.m. Deborah appeared on my screen, professional and calm. I want to start by acknowledging that the way your departure was handled was unacceptable, she said immediately. We were not informed of the details at the time. I've since reviewed the termination process, and I want to offer a formal apology. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you, I said. That means something. She nodded. We now understand that Connor pushed through your removal under the guise of modernization. He never disclosed how reliant the company still was on your original architecture. I didn't respond. Laura, she continued, what would it take to bring you back? I paused. I'm not coming back, I said plainly. I've accepted another offer, one that values my experience without requiring me to prove my worth all over again. She exhaled. Then I'll ask something else. Would you be willing to speak to the board this Friday? We're conducting a leadership review. Your insight would be valuable. So this is where it was headed. I'd known Connor was losing his grip, but now it was official. They were preparing for a potential removal, and I had just become the key witness. Late Monday night, while finishing my documentation for the board, a Slack message popped up from an old team member. Hey, just heard from someone inside. Connor's scrambling. He knows you're behind the fix. He's planning something. Something in my stomach twisted. Because the only thing more dangerous than a CEO out of his depth was one who realized it too late. Tuesday, 7:46 a.m. The Slack message still sat on my screen. Connor's scrambling. He knows you're behind the fix. He's planning something. I stared at it for a while. Connor was many things. Impulsive, insecure, dangerously self-assured. But I hadn't expected him to retaliate this late in the game. He must have realized the board was circling. My consulting agreement had already been shared internally. The log showed who'd implemented the stabilization patches. There was no more hiding, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try. At 9:08 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the 4th call, I picked up. Laura. His voice was low, controlled. I hadn't heard it since the day of my termination. Connor, I think we need to clear the air. I said nothing. You've made your point, he continued. You've shown them how valuable you still are. You've reminded everyone of your legacy. His voice twisted on the last word. I'm not trying to make a point, I replied calmly. I was asked to fix a system your team couldn't handle. I did that. You were also asked to speak to the board Friday. So he knew. That didn't surprise me. What are you planning to tell them? He asked. That depends, I said. What are you afraid I'll say? There was a pause. Then the mask slipped a little. I'm asking for a chance to make this right. Let's not let this spiral. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but from the sheer irony. Now he wanted to repair things. After dismissing my contributions. After calling me obsolete and outdated. After cutting me loose with a single-line text like I was a forgotten vendor. Connor, I said evenly, You've had every opportunity to lead with integrity. Instead, you lied, covered your mistakes, and nearly tanked a product that supports hundreds of companies. This isn't spiraling. This is accountability. I'm willing to offer a deal. That got my attention, but not for the reason he hoped. I'm listening, I said, folding my arms. You come back as a systems advisor. Title of your choice, full autonomy, executive compensation package. We present it to the board together as a show of unity. Unity. I almost admired the audacity. Connor, I said slowly, you want me to save your job, not the company. He didn't deny it. Your name still means something here, he said instead. Don't throw away everything you built just to prove a point. It was subtle manipulation, framed as logic, as loyalty, as if I was the one being petty. I took a breath. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm preserving the parts that matter. And if that means speaking the truth to the board, so be it. He exhaled heavily. You know they'll remove me. I know they'll make the decision that's best for Redline. And I ended the call. Wednesday, 4:20 p.m., Maya called. He's running scared, she said. Pulled 3 of us into a meeting today and tried to make it sound like the system failure wasn't his fault. Blamed legacy constraints and incomplete documentation. Classic deflection, I muttered. Laura, she said softly, you know you're going to be the deciding vote, right? I'm not voting, I replied. I'm just telling the truth. Sometimes that's the same thing. I didn't respond, because she was right. Thursday, I spent most of the day finalizing documentation. Every patch I'd written, every bypass I'd corrected, every flaw I'd traced back to Connor's decisions. It wasn't vindictive. It was just clear. The facts. A timeline. The truth. And as I finished compiling the notes for my presentation, I added one final line in the summary. No system fails without warning. But when leadership refuses to listen, even the most resilient systems break. Friday morning, I walked into the boardroom at Redline for the first time in 89 days. 11 people sat around the polished table. Connor was already there. He didn't look at me. Deborah Lynn cleared her throat and said, Ms. Klein, we're ready for your statement. I opened my folder. The room fell silent, and I began. Friday, 9:03 a.m. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Frosted glass walls, brushed metal chairs. The kind of modern design Connor had insisted on during the last renovation. More style, less substance. A perfect metaphor. I stood at the head of the table, my notes in front of me. 11 board members looked back at me. Some curious, some tense, a few guarded. Connor sat halfway down the left side, suit crisp, face unreadable. He didn't meet my eyes. Deborah Lynn gave a brief nod. Ms. Klein, the floor is yours. I straightened my spine and began. I joined Redline 23 years ago, when this company was an idea scribbled on a napkin in a rented co-working space. I wrote the first line of code for what eventually became our core product, Secure Sync. I built the encryption infrastructure that kept our clients' data secure and our reputation intact. No one interrupted. Even Connor sat still, his jaw clenched. For years, I worked behind the scenes, leading teams, solving problems, writing documentation, patching vulnerabilities before they became threats. I worked late, on weekends, during holidays, because I believed in what we were building. I flipped a page. In March of this year, without warning or discussion, I was removed from my position via text message. The justification, as stated, was that my methods were obsolete and outdated. A few members shifted uncomfortably. What followed, I continued, was a complete breakdown of the company's most vital infrastructure. Not because the code was bad, but because no one bothered to understand the foundation they were standing on. I tapped the report in front of me. 3 critical protocols were altered without testing. Certificate renewal procedures were ignored. System handshakes were rerouted through insecure modules. Documentation was either outdated or deleted altogether. I paused. And when it all began to fail, the company called me back. Still no reaction from Connor. I agreed to help. Not for personal gain and not for redemption, but because I believe in the people who still work here, the clients who rely on our systems, and the reputation we all built. Together. I looked up. But I will not help rebuild a company that refuses to learn from its mistakes. Deborah cleared her throat. Ms. Klein, are you stating you won't continue consulting with us? I've completed my contract, I said. The system is stable, fully operational. I've provided detailed documentation to prevent future incidents, but I'm not staying, because I'm no longer interested in working for an organization that treats experience as a liability. Connor finally spoke. That's rich coming from someone who intentionally kept parts of the system undocumented. I looked at him. Calm, measured. I submitted 3 separate proposals to improve documentation standards, I replied. All were rejected. I offered to train newer engineers. The sessions were canceled. I raised concerns about the knowledge gap 6 months ago in an email sent to you and 3 others at this table. That email was never acknowledged. I let that sit in the air. If anyone kept the system from being fully understood, it was the leadership who decided that what they didn't understand must not matter. Silence. Then James Barton, the board member closest to Connor, leaned forward. Laura, he said, what do you recommend moving forward? I didn't hesitate. Hire people who know how to ask questions, who value institutional knowledge as much as innovation. Build a real transition protocol. Incentivize knowledge sharing. And don't ever again assume that because someone is older, they're obsolete. Deborah nodded. Thank you, she said. We appreciate your honesty. I closed my folder and stepped back. I was done. Saturday, 11:24 a.m. The call came from Deborah. Connor has resigned, she said. The board voted unanimously to begin a leadership transition. We've asked Robert to serve as interim CEO. I said nothing. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. There's one more thing, Deborah continued. The board has agreed to implement your documentation framework. They're calling it the Legacy Protocol. We hope you'll let us attribute it to you. I smiled, just a little. That's fine, I said. Thank you. 2 weeks later, I started my new position at Greywall Systems, a cybersecurity firm known for valuing deep knowledge over surface gloss. My team consisted of engineers in their 20s and 50s, working side by side, exchanging insights and respect. During my onboarding, my new manager said something I hadn't heard in years. You're not here to prove yourself, Laura. You're here because you already have. 3 months later, I received a small package in the mail from an unknown sender. Inside was a handwritten card. One line. For everything we didn't say while you were here. Thank you. No name. Just a folded Redline Systems note card and a USB drive labeled Hazel's Backup, Legacy Matters. I sat back in my chair and stared out the window. Sometimes the best revenge isn't control. It's letting go. On your terms. And knowing the thing they tried to throw away was the very thing holding them together.